From the time we are children, we are told the same story. Go to school, study hard, earn the diploma. Education will give you freedom. It will open doors. It will guarantee success. It will give you the life you dream about. That story has been repeated so many times that it feels almost sacred. Who would dare question it? And yet, more than 2,000 years ago, Plato did exactly that. He looked at education not as an innocent process of learning, but as the most powerful tool society has to shape its citizens. Plato saw something others refused to see. Education can be a light, guiding the soul toward truth. But it can also be a chain, binding the soul to illusions that serve the state, not the individual. It can free you or it can enslave you, and often you will not even realize the difference. That is the darkest truth about education. It is never neutral. It always points the soul in a direction. The only real question is who is holding the compass? Who is turning your soul, and for what purpose? In this video, we will walk through Plato's philosophy of education. We will see the brilliance of his vision and the shadow that hides inside it. And by the end, you will understand why the classroom has never simply been about knowledge. It has always been about power. When we think about learning, most of us imagine classrooms, textbooks, lectures, and exams. We picture the slow accumulation of facts, the storage of information, and the measurement of knowledge by grades. But for Plato, this was not learning at all. To him, education was not about filling a vessel with data. It was about turning the entire soul. Plato believed reality itself was divided into two distinct levels. On one side lies the visible world, the world of appearances, the world we see and touch every day. It is filled with change, decay, and imperfection. It is the flickering shadow of truth, never stable, never permanent. On the other side lies the world of forms, the eternal patterns, the perfect realities behind every imperfect copy. Beauty itself, justice itself, goodness itself. They are not things you see with your eyes, but things you grasp with your mind. And here is the first shock. For Plato, most people spend their entire lives trapped in the world of appearances. They mistake shadows for substance. They chase after wealth, power, and pleasure, thinking these will give them truth. But in reality, they are prisoners staring at a wall, confusing shadows for reality. This is why Plato drew what he called the divided line. At the lowest level sits imagination, the realm of illusions and myths. Above that is belief, where people accept the evidence of their senses. Higher still is mathematical reasoning, where the mind begins to step away from the senses and into abstraction. And at the top is direct knowledge, the vision of the forms themselves. Education in this picture is not about memorizing more. It is about climbing the line, moving from shadows to belief to reasoning until the soul is capable of looking directly at truth. His most famous story captures this in unforgettable imagery. The allegory of the cave. Imagine human beings chained in darkness, their necks locked, their eyes fixed on the wall in front of them. Behind them, firelight projects moving shadows. All they ever know are these shadows, so they believe shadows are the world. Then one prisoner is dragged out. His body resists. His eyes burn in the sudden light. At first, he hates it, but step by step, he adjusts. He turns from darkness to dim reflections, from dim reflections to objects, and finally to the blinding sun. Only then does he see the source of truth. For Plato, that is education, not stuffing the mind with information, but wrenching the entire being out of illusion, not training the memory, but converting the soul. That is why he said, education is not the art of putting sight into blind eyes, but the art of turning the whole eye of the soul toward the light. And here lies the haunting truth. If education is the power to turn the soul, then whoever controls education controls which way the soul turns. Will it turn toward truth or toward shadows? That, Plato understood, is the deepest question of all. If Plato was right that education is about turning the soul, then the next question is obvious. How do you actually do it? What kind of program could take a raw human being, pull him out of the shadows, and shape him into a leader capable of seeing truth itself? Plato gave an answer, and it was not gentle. It was a program of strict stages, each one designed to test, filter, and reshape a person's character. The journey was not for everyone. In fact, that was the point. The first stage was storytelling. In the Republic, Book 3, Plato insists that the earliest education of children must be in music and myth. But not just any stories. He wanted a ruthless censorship of poetry and drama. Homer, the great poet of Greece, was to be rewritten or banned. Why? Because stories plant images deep in the soul. If children hear tales of gods deceiving or heroes weeping in weakness, they will imitate them. For Plato, the imagination of the young must be guarded, and only the noble stories allowed. Education began with shaping the emotions before reason even entered. The second stage was gymnastics, not for winning trophies, but for disciplining the body so it would serve the soul. A weak or indulgent body, he thought, would corrupt the spirit. A strong body kept in balance with music would create courage and self-control. Physical training was not just about strength, but about tuning the human being into harmony. The third stage was mathematics. Arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and harmonics. To us, these look like technical subjects, but Plato saw them differently. They were not about practical calculation. They were about turning the mind away from the senses and toward the abstract. Numbers and shapes do not change the way material things do. They lead the mind upward, toward permanence. This stage was the preparation for philosophy itself. Then came the heart of the program, dialectic. Here the student was trained to question every assumption, to climb beyond hypotheses, to grasp principles directly. Dialectic was not debate for the sake of victory, but dialogue for the sake of truth. It was the most dangerous and the most powerful part of the program. Dangerous because once you teach people to question everything, they might question the very foundations of society. Powerful because only through dialectic could the soul finally look directly at the form of the good. But Plato never imagined this road was for everyone. That was the final stage, selection. At every point in the journey, people would drop away. Most would stay in the world of work and trade. A smaller group would serve as auxiliaries, guardians of the city. And only a rare handful, those who survived the entire training and endured the dialectic, would be raised to the highest role, the philosopher king. This is the sharp edge of Plato's vision. Education was not a universal right, it was a filter, a ladder that only a few would climb to the top, while the rest remained at lower levels, serving the structure of the state. And here is the unsettling conclusion. Plato described education not to bring everyone forward, but to identify the few who could rule everyone else. The classroom was not an open door, it was a gate, designed to close on most and open only for the chosen. If the first two stages of Plato's program sound ambitious but almost noble, this next part will disturb you, because here Plato revealed something most people prefer not to admit. Education is not only about truth, it is also about control. In Book 3 of the Republic, Plato introduced what he himself called a noble lie, the Genaion pseudos, the great fabrication. The story went like this. Every citizen is born with a certain kind of metal in their soul. Those with gold are destined to be rulers. Those with silver are guardians and soldiers. Those with iron or bronze are farmers, craftsmen, and laborers. No one chooses their place. It is fixed by the nature of their soul. Why tell such a story? Because Plato argued society cannot survive unless people accept their role. Most people will not naturally agree to be ruled. They must be persuaded not with arguments, but with myth. The noble lie was meant to give dignity to inequality, to make hierarchy feel natural. By convincing people that their position was inscribed in their very being, the city would hold together. This is not the image of Plato most of us are taught in school. The philosopher of reason, the champion of truth, openly recommended a lie. He did not call it wicked, he called it noble, because in his eyes it served the higher purpose of order. But that was only the beginning. Plato also demanded censorship of art and literature. He wanted to strip the city of poems that portrayed the gods as tricksters, or heroes as weak and cowardly. Homer, the very foundation of Greek culture, would be silenced or rewritten. Why? Because art is dangerous. Stories bypass reason and shape the soul directly. If education is about turning the soul, then controlling art is about deciding which direction that soul will face. And Plato went further still. The guardians, the warrior class of his republic, were not allowed to own private property. They were not allowed to keep gold or silver. Even family life was to be regulated. Marriages would be arranged by lottery, controlled by the state, to prevent the rise of private dynasties. Children would be raised in common, separated from their parents, so loyalty would be to the city rather than the household. To Plato, all of this was necessary. Without it, the guardians would become corrupt. They would use their position to enrich their families, to pass power down to their children, and the republic would collapse. By stripping them of property, by controlling reproduction, by dictating stories, the state could ensure that the ruling class remained pure, loyal, and incorruptible. But look at the darker side. Education here is no longer the freeing of the soul. It is the engineering of society. It is myth-making, censorship, and regulation of life itself. Plato's noble lie, his bans on poetry, his control of family and property are not the tools of a teacher. They are the tools of a ruler. And that is the shock most people miss. Plato's philosophy of education was never just about knowledge. It was about shaping belief. It was about creating citizens who would accept their place, obey their rulers, and serve the structure of the city. The truth Plato forces us to face is uncomfortable. Education is not neutral. It can elevate, but it can also indoctrinate. It can liberate a few and bind the many, and often it does both at the same time. Here we arrive at one of the strangest contradictions in Plato's entire philosophy of education. On the one hand, he raised the art of questioning to its highest form. He invented the dialectic, the disciplined conversation where every assumption could be challenged, every belief examined, every answer pushed to its breaking point. For Plato, the philosopher's task was to never stop asking, to pierce through appearances and dig until only truth remained. This, he said, was the highest freedom of the human mind. And yet, in the same breath, Plato demanded censorship. He called for the silencing of poets. He recommended the telling of myths that were not true, but useful. He insisted that most people should never touch dialectic at all, because questioning everything was too dangerous for them. Only a select few could handle the fire. For everyone else, questioning would lead not to freedom, but to chaos. This is the paradox at the heart of Plato's vision. The philosopher is free, but the citizen is bound. The elite are trained to think, but the masses are trained to believe. Dialectic is celebrated as the highest form of education, but it is locked behind closed doors, reserved for the chosen few who might one day rule. Why would Plato do this? Because he feared disorder more than he valued freedom. He saw what happened in Athens when citizens demanded too much liberty. He saw the trial and execution of Socrates, his own teacher, condemned by a democracy that could not tolerate his questioning. To Plato, giving dialectic to the masses would be like handing a torch to children in a room full of oil. It would burn everything down. So he drew the line. Freedom for the few, guidance for the many, truth for the philosopher, stories for the citizen. What he called education was not one single path, but two very different ones. For the guardians of truth, the long and brutal ascent toward the form of the good. For everyone else, a carefully crafted illusion that kept society stable. It is here that Plato forces us to face an uncomfortable question. Is it possible to give freedom of thought to all without destroying order? Or must every society choose between truth for the few and myths for the many? Plato's answer was clear. He did not trust the crowd with the fire of philosophy, and so he caged their minds for their own safety. But in doing so, he revealed something deeper. Education, even at its highest, is never just about enlightenment. It is always also about boundaries. Who gets to ask? Who must obey? Who climbs out of the cave and who is kept inside? That paradox is not only Plato's, it is ours. Plato's Republic may have been written 24 centuries ago, but his blueprint feels strangely familiar when we look at education today. We live in an age of schools, universities, credentials, and standardized tests. We like to think of these as modern inventions, but behind them lurks a pattern that Plato would recognize immediately. The details have changed. The logic has not. Consider the noble lie. In Plato's Athens, it was the myth of metals. Gold for rulers, silver for guardians, bronze and iron for laborers. In our time, the noble lie wears a new costume. It is the story that education guarantees success, that the right diploma will elevate you, that climbing the ladder of degrees will take you from the masses to the elite. This story, too, is not entirely true. For every student who rises, thousands are left behind. But the myth works. It keeps people believing that the system is fair, that effort will always be rewarded, that inequality is natural because credentials sort people by their merit. Plato would nod in recognition. And what about censorship? Today, no government openly bans Homer, but the rewriting of history, the careful crafting of curricula, the shaping of textbooks, these are quieter forms of the same impulse. Every nation decides what stories children will hear, which facts will be highlighted, which narratives will be softened or erased. To Plato, the power to choose stories was the essence of education. Modern societies may flatter themselves with words like objectivity and neutrality, but the battle over school curricula shows that the struggle for the soul of the citizen still happens on the page of the textbook. Then there is the mechanism of selection. Plato wanted only a rare few to reach dialectic. Today, we use standardized testing, competitive admissions, and professional licensing. These are the gates through which only some may pass. They filter the population, deciding who enters the upper professions, who is stamped as qualified, and who remains outside. Just as Plato's guardians were separated from the workers, today's graduates of elite universities are separated from the rest of society by credentials that function like modern metals in the soul. The effect is the same. Education promises to lift all, but in practice, it recreates hierarchy. It filters, sorts, and stratifies. It produces an elite whose legitimacy rests not on bloodlines, but on degrees. The noble lie has simply been updated. Instead of being told that the gods mixed metals into your soul, you are told that the admissions office found merit in your file. And perhaps the most haunting echo of Plato is this: the claim that all this is for the good of society, that the system is not just about individual ambition, but about order, stability, and progress. Plato would smile at how well his logic survived, because he knew what we often forget. Education has never been only about truth. It has always been about control. So when we look at today's industrial system of education, the question is not whether it is modern or ancient. The question is whether we have really escaped Plato's shadow, or whether we are still living inside his design, still governed by myths, still marching through gates that were built not to liberate, but to sort. It is easy to think of Plato's ideas as ancient abstractions locked away in dusty books. But you do not have to travel to Athens to see them. You only need to look around. the noble lie, the censorship of stories, the filtering of citizens, it is all here, alive in our modern lives. Take the first image. A young graduate, cap and gown, diploma in hand. He went to an Ivy League university, paid more than his parents could afford, and now he is celebrated by his family as if the golden ticket has been won. But what happens after the ceremony? Anxiety, endless comparison, the desperate chase for prestige, promotions, and salaries that never feel enough. He believed the story that the right degree would bring freedom. In reality, the myth of medals became the myth of credentials. His soul was turned, not toward truth, but toward endless striving for recognition. Plato would call it education serving hierarchy, not liberation. Now, picture the second image, a high school teacher. She once loved literature, loved helping students see the power of words. But her daily reality has changed. The curriculum is scripted. The pressure is constant. She is told to teach to the test, to follow the state-approved text word for word. What began as a passion has been hollowed out by metrics. She has been forced into the role Plato prescribed, delivering carefully chosen stories, filtering imagination so that the system remains stable. The censorship is subtle but no less real. And then the third image, a gig worker in the digital economy. He has trained himself in quick skills, coding boot camps, marketing courses, constant upskilling to stay relevant. His education is not about forming the soul, it is about survival. Every new platform demands a new certificate, a new badge. He has no time to reflect, to question, to pursue truth. He is chained not in a cave of shadows, but in an algorithmic treadmill. His learning is functional, shallow, always one step behind the market's demand. Plato would see it as the lowest rung of the ladder, useful labor but never the ascent to the good. Three images: a graduate enslaved by prestige, a teacher trapped by scripts, a worker racing against algorithms. None of them live in Athens, yet all of them live inside Plato's design. The lesson is clear. Plato's philosophy of education is not a relic, it is a mirror. And when we look into it, we do not see the past, we see ourselves. By now, the picture seems clear. Plato's education was demanding, elitist, even manipulative. But before we condemn him too quickly, we need to ask a harder question. What did Plato truly want? At the core of his philosophy was not cynicism, but longing. Plato believed the soul was meant to rise toward the good, the ultimate principle of truth and justice. His harsh program, his censorship, even his noble lie were designed, at least in his eyes, to protect that ascent. He feared corruption more than he feared control. To him, better a society guided by a myth than a society collapsing in chaos. And yet, the danger is obvious. A system built on control, no matter how noble the intent, can be abused. Karl Popper, the 20th century critic of Plato, accused him of laying the intellectual foundation for closed societies, for authoritarianism disguised as wisdom. Popper saw the Republic not as a utopia, but as a warning, a vision where freedom is sacrificed to stability, where truth is rationed, and where rulers claim to know the good on behalf of everyone else. So which is it? Was Plato offering us a map to enlightenment or a manual for manipulation? Did he mean the noble lie as a sincere policy or as a philosophical provocation to test our thinking? Scholars still debate, and perhaps that uncertainty is the most revealing clue of all. Because in the end, Plato forces us to confront the paradox of education itself. To guide the soul, someone must decide the direction. But who decides? And who guards the guardians from twisting that power for themselves? Plato may have wanted the good. He may have wanted justice, but the system he described carries a warning across the centuries. A noble intention can become a dark reality. The very tools meant to liberate the soul can also be used to chain it. Plato's darkest truth about education is this: It is never neutral. It always shapes the soul, it always serves a purpose, and it always points you in a direction. The only question is, whose direction is it? If education can turn the soul, then the one who controls education controls the future. That was true in ancient Athens, and it is true today. Schools, universities, corporations, governments, all of them are in the business of shaping what you believe, what you value, and what you aspire to. They do not simply teach, they steer. Plato wanted that steering to aim at the good. He wanted philosopher kings who had climbed out of the cave to guide everyone else. But the system he described carries the same danger in our time as it did in his. Whoever holds the wheel of education may not guide you toward truth. They may guide you toward obedience. So what can you do? You cannot simply abandon education, but you can reclaim it. Begin with an audit of your knowledge. Ask yourself, why was I taught this? Who benefits from me believing it? Practice the Socratic habit of questioning, even when the answers are uncomfortable. Build your own canon of learning. Go back to sources, to philosophy, to history, instead of living on secondhand summaries. And above all, redefine success. Stop equating credentials with freedom. Start measuring your life by the strength of your mind and the independence of your judgment. Plato gave us both a map and a warning. He showed us the path out of the cave, but he also showed us how easily that path can be twisted into chains. The decision is yours. Will you let others turn your soul for you, or will you take hold of your own education? Remember this: if you do not choose your education, someone else will, and they will not choose it for your freedom.